Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Perhaps the best movie version of this would be The Matrix, the original movie, laying out in many ways both Plato's Allegory of the Cave and, of course, Descartes' problem of the external world. So, visually, the cave looks roughly like this. You've got people trapped in a cave, and there's a fire illuminating the area, and then there are those walking, carrying objects to cast shadows upon the far wall. So this is kind of a rough visualization of what the cave looks like. So, getting into the details of the cave, what's going on? Well, here's what's going on. So, according to Plato, people, since childhood, have been living in this cave with an opening towards the light. They're chained in place and can only see what is before them. And above and behind them is a fire. And between the fire and the prisoners is a raised way in a low wall. People carry vessels, statues, and figures of animals which appear over the wall. And the people, chained up there, see only shadows thrown by the fire on the opposite wall of the cave. And they think they're naming what was actually before them. To them, the truth would be nothing but the shadows of images. Now, Plato, of course, is using, fire and so forth because he obviously didn't have the technology for, say, virtual reality today, or even something as simple as, movies or projectors. But you could, sort of punch up the allegory of the cave with technology. And again, the Matrix is a good example of this, or you could use virtual reality, that people are in a virtual reality since childhood and can only experience that virtual reality. And so that's the setup. So then, what happens? Well, what occurs is there's a person who escapes the chains somehow, that the chains have grown, rusty and weak, and they're able to break free. But who can say exactly how this happened? So a person is free within the cave, and they look towards the light, but they find it painful and distressing. They cannot see the realities which they have previously seen the shadows. And the person will approach nearer to being, in Plato's term, nearer to the greater reality, and will have a clearer vision. And of course, will be perplexed, if asked, to name the passing objects, because the person will initially think shadows are truer than the objects that they now see. So the person is free in the cave, looking around, kind of starting to realize what is going on. In the next step, the person is outside in the sunlight. They've escaped the cave. And of course, in the sunlight, they will be pained and dazzled, and they'll need to grow accustomed to the upper world. Begin by being able to see shadows, then reflections in the water, then actual objects, then the light of the stars and the moon, and lastly, the sun. And the person will come to argue that the sun is a cause of all which they have been accustomed to behold. And so this free person, who's escaped the cave and is out in the world of the real, they will praise themselves and pity the dwellers of the cave, and would not care for the honors given to those who best observe, remember, and make inferences about the shadows within the cave. For if the person returned to the cave, their eyes would be full of darkness, and before recovering from coming from the light, they would fare poorly in such contests. And given how poorly such a person would behave, the inhabitants of the cave would think it much better not to even think of ascending. And if anyone tried to free them and lead them to the light, they would put them to death. And of course, Socrates is foreshadowing his own fate. He is the person that is returned to the cave, and in the Apology he is tried, and the Crito he is put to death. And of course he can foreshadow because this is written after the fact by Plato. So what is the allegory itself? Well, here's how it works. The cave, the prison, is the world of sight. So, in Plato's analogy and his metaphor, we are the dwellers within the cave. And the light of the fire is the physical sun. And the journey upwards is the ascent of the soul into the intellectual world. We are escaping the darkness of the cave for the true reality. And as you might imagine, this metaphor, this allegory, has caught on. And it no doubt existed even before Plato, the ascent from the darkness of the underground to the light of day. And we still use the term, to be enlightened. And when we talk about being, wise, we talk about the person, again, being enlightened. And if we draw a cartoon, we want to show a person getting an idea, we would draw a light bulb above their head. So the allegory is one that is stuck. And again, the 1999 movie, The Matrix, essentially is a version of Plato's allegory of the cave. Now, Plato continues along with this notion of the good. And the good is the sun in the allegory of the cave. It is the sun outside the cave. And for Plato, the good is the universal author of all things beautiful and right. It is the parent and lord of light in this visible world. It is the immediate source of reason and truth in the intellectual. And so Plato has this super entity, the good, which is a form, but kind of the greatest of forms. And again, it would not be out of place to see it as sort of analogous to God in many ways. Although it's not a person, it doesn't have thoughts and feelings, etc., etc. But it is really super impressive. Now, if someone has seen the good in the allegory of the cave, emerged from the cave, and seen the allegorical sun, they would generally be unwilling to descend back into human affairs. Because going from divine contemplation to the evil state of the world, such a person would behave ridiculously before they get accustomed to the darkness. As one example given by Plato through Socrates, if such a person who's returned is compelled to fight in the courts or other places about the shadows of justice, they will seem, foolish. Because if they attempt to meet the conceptions of those who have never seen absolute justice, they will be, incapable. They will seem to be foolish. In part because of their eyes being bewildered coming in from out of the light. He's again drawing an analogy here to how it works physically. If you're in the bright light and you head in the darkness, you have a hard time seeing. Likewise, if you're in the darkness and head out to the bright light, you have a hard time seeing. So a person who remembers this, when he sees someone whose vision is perplexed, will not be too ready to laugh, and will ask if the person has come from a brighter life and hence cannot see in the dark, or have they come from the darkness to the day and are dazzled by excessive light. He will count the first, happy, and pity the other. And once again, Socrates is, foreshadowing his own trial in the Apology. And of course, Plato is writing this after the trial, so Plato knows exactly what's going to happen. Continuing with the cave. So the source of knowledge. Plato, continuing with another analogy involving the eye, he asserts that one cannot put knowledge into the soul which is not there before, like sight into blind eyes. The power and capacity of learning exist in the soul already, as the eye was unable to turn from darkness to the light without the whole body. The instrument of knowledge can be turned from the world of becoming to that of being only by movement of the soul, the entire soul, and learn to endure the sight of being in the brightest and best of being, the good itself. And there is an art that affects this conversion. The art doesn't implant the faculty of sight. It already exists, but is turned in the wrong direction, so it looks away from truth. The other virtues of the soul, he claims, are alike bodily qualities. Even if not innate, they can be implanted later by habit and exercise. And for Plato, the virtue of wisdom contains a divine element which always remains. And by this, its conversion is rendered useful and profitable, or alternatively, hurtful and useless. Now he notes the rogue. Now, the rogue has a certain narrow intelligence, and their paltry soul clearly sees the way to their end. They are the reverse of the blind. Their keen sight and evil serves evil very well, and they are mischievous in proportion to their cleverness. And what he's concerned about here is a lack of what he calls the unity of the virtues, that someone with some good qualities, some virtues, is extremely dangerous. And what to be properly good, one must have all the virtues. We'll see more of this when we talk about our good dead friend Immanuel Kant. And so that is the end of Plato's Allegory of the Cave.